Welcome to tonight's live stream where we are going to be discussing family planning, legacy planning, otherwise known as estate planning. So this topic encompasses financial planning topics that impact you during your life, but of course set your estate up for the disposition of your choice. Now, you have two choices. One, you're already signed up for an estate plan, and it's the government's plan. Your choice is to either accept that or to customize your own plan. So with me tonight, I have Ms. Nicole Reining, Certified Financial Planner Professional, and Mr. Ed Rossi, also a Certified Financial Planner Professional. Between the three of us, we've sat with thousands and thousands of people just preparing for the show tonight. We got off on a tangent of all the different stories that we've experienced, and we want to share some of those stories with you tonight so you can relate to the topics that we're discussing, and hopefully they can help provide you some information to make some better decisions, work with the right people in your life to coordinate strategy to help keep more of your money in your pocket and less of it that signs up for that government plan. So, a couple house cleaning items to begin with. We will be doing a raffle tonight. We're actually going to do two raffles. So on your screen, you should see a QR code. If you can't see it now, you'll see it pretty soon. To register for the raffle, just simply scan the QR code. You're going to receive our Trump tax cut ebook, and this is filled with a lot of impactful information to help you learn more how to take advantage of the Trump tax cuts while they're still here for another couple of years. So register for that. We're going to do two raffles tonight, one about halfway through, one at the end of the show tonight, and each one will be for a $100 gift certificate to your favorite restaurant. So make sure to sign up for those, and our marketing team will be in contact with you if you win to learn what your favorite restaurant is and get that out to you. On top of that, we have an interactive discussion tonight. I see, looks like Drewski, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, has already submitted one question. We're going to get to that as we go through the show, but I want to encourage you to submit your questions. This is not just a lecture about the stories that we have. We really want to be interactive with you. Of course, we're not attorneys and we can't provide legal advice. We are investment advisors, but we can't provide personalized investment advice. But general questions that apply to situations that may benefit everyone paying attention tonight, we're happy to discuss, and we want you to submit those questions. And Ed, Nicole, myself, will banter them around and have a good discussion, and hopefully that's helpful to you. Okay, so we have some pretty big changes to tax law in the past few years that apply to retirement accounts. So we wanted to jump into this right off the bat because it impacts every single person watching this tonight most likely, and that is finally we get guidance and clarity from the IRS as it pertains to inherited retirement accounts. So your 401k, your IRA, whenever you pass away, it goes to your beneficiaries. And the Secure Act changed the rules for how beneficiaries must take money out of those accounts going back 2019, I believe, was when it first passed.
Went into effect in 2020.
2020, so late 2019 is when it first passed. But like many things that the government does, there was a lack of information. There wasn't a ton of clarity. So financial planners, attorneys, CPAs have had to do the best that we possibly can during that time to help prepare people for what we believe the guidance may be issued, what it will finally say. Okay, so we finally received that guidance in July of this year. And I mean,
super clear,
yes,
crystal clear.
It's still really, really clear. There's nothing at all that we have questions anymore. But again, to provide some slack here to the government, it's tremendously complex. I mean, there's so much of what's in the Internal Revenue Code is probably way over the top, but there are so many unique situations that they have to spell out what happens when this takes place or that takes place. Retirement account law is tremendously complex. This just added to the complexity. So Nicole, I want to throw it to you. Just real basic terms, what were some of the changes as far as guidance that was provided to help clarify what beneficiaries of retirement accounts must do when they inherit an IRA?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key things to remember is the decedent or the person that passed away, whoever you're inheriting that asset from, it's really important to clarify how old was that person. Was that person already having to take required minimum distributions or not? That's one key piece of information that we need in order to determine, do you need to continue taking those required minimum distributions? When do you have to? There's still, so they came out with this 10-year time frame. You just have to deplete the account within 10 years. A lot of advisors just rolled with that for the last 5 years. We've been like, okay, just empty the account by the end of the 10th year. Well, turns out they actually want you to start taking required minimum distributions every year of those 10 years, depending on how old the decedent was. And so there's a lot of questions around that, but then it's also, how old are you? What was your relation to the decedent? There's just a lot of different questions that come into play that it's really helpful to have this guidance now and have some answers instead of, well, we think this is what the IRS meant, and now we actually know, and we can go through with all of our clients. There's even a chart, there's a flow chart that I look at almost every case to be like, okay, what applies to who, to make sure that we're following the right guidance.
So, yeah, a couple of different points you brought up there. One, you have to understand your relationship to the decedent. So this is the eligible designated beneficiary. So we're not going to bore you and put you to sleep here, but essentially, if you're more than 10 years older or younger, than the person who died, you are most likely subject to these rules, unless you are possibly also disabled. A sibling, if you're within 10 years, you would not be subject to these rules. But most children, I guess all children, would be subject to these rules, and that's mostly who inherits these retirement accounts.
I really hope you're not within 10 years of your parents' age.
Yeah.
For your mother's sake, I really hope that's not the case.
So that's the eligible designated beneficiary. And all that means is if you are a child or a grandchild and you receive a retirement account, you are subject to these new rules. Now, she mentioned what is known as the required beginning date. Mm-hmm. So RBD, when you're doing research on retirement accounts, and if you have a parent that is aging and you expect to receive an IRA at some point, you'll most likely do this research. You'll come across the term required beginning date. And this is what Nicole was referencing. What's so critical about the required, first, what is it? And then what's so critical about it when determining the required minimum distribution schedule that the person who inherits the retirement account must follow?
Great question. Required beginning date, what it comes down to in the most simplest form is the original owner of the IRA, were they or were they not taking their required minimum distribution when they passed? A lot of clients that I run into, they started taking required minimum distributions at age 70 and a half, maybe age 72. And by the time they pass, they're in their mid-80s, maybe they're 100 years old, but they had started taking those required minimum distributions. And so now they pass away, their kids inherit their IRAs, and so now those children have to continue to take required minimum distributions over the next 10 years. That's one of the things the Secure Act, the first version of it, eliminated was, for majority of Americans, what they called stretch IRAs. Now you have to have these IRAs liquidated within 10 years. Somebody passes away in 2021, that IRA has to be depleted 100% by 2031, December 31st. And so the question became, and that's what we got clarity on, was, okay, well, do we have to wait until the 10th year because I don't want to take anything right away, or do I have to continue taking on my own schedule now that 10 years? And so if they started taking required minimum distributions when they passed away, the beneficiaries have to take some type of minimum distribution, and there's calculations that are done. It's not as difficult as it seems. We do it for our clients all the time.
And it's not a lot.
No, it's not a lot, and I think that's by design. It's interesting you say that. It's not a lot. I'll tell clients all the time, if it's a $100,000 IRA, you would think, so I guess the required distribution is $10,000 a year. It's not. And I'll stress, I think that's by design because they're playing the long game, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've talked about this for a very long time. So, but again, I'm fairly cynical when it comes to what the government is doing. Look, we have $36 trillion in debt. We're spending $3 billion almost in interest per day. And last I checked, there were about $76 trillion, I believe, in retirement accounts. Somebody maybe Google that and put that in the comments. How many dollars in retirement accounts?
Someone do the research for us.
Well, so it might be 46. So I don't want to misremember and misspeak here, but there's a whole lot of money inside retirement accounts. And what the Secure Act does is it changes the game. Mm-hmm. Previously, Ed, you pointed it out, beneficiaries were able to stretch those IRA distributions over the course of their life, making those retirement accounts last potentially 40, 50, 60, 70 years. Think about it. If you passed away at 85 and you left your retirement account with $1 million in it to your 18-year-old grandson, he would have to take a very, very, very small incremental piece out each year throughout the rest of his life. Well, he very well may live to be 100 years old. So that's, stretching out the retirement account over the course of their life. The Secure Act completely changed that. And what it says is now, regardless of the required beginning date, so regardless if you're taking RMDs during your life, then pass away, or if you pass away prior to required minimum distribution age, that account has to be fully distributed regardless within 10 years. If you have begun required minimum distributions, or if your parents or grandparents had begun required minimum distributions, when you inherit that account, you must also take RMDs, but still fully distribute that account by December 31st of the 10th year post-death. So now this trillions and trillions of dollars inside the retirement account that we have, instead of it being stretched out over the course of people's lifetimes, it is forced to be distributed. So I referenced at the beginning of this show that you already have an estate plan, whether you know it or not. And by default, it's the government's plan. And that is to simply receive that inherited IRA and fully distribute it within 10 years and pay income taxes on all of that income. So that's the first part when I say I'm cynical and what the government has in store here. And again, this is just my opinion. But I find it kind of hard to believe that there was not this thought process behind changing it from the lifetime stretch IRA to the 10-year rule because of the amount of spending that the government does. And this is at the federal and state level because many states impose income tax and IRA distributions are subject to income tax. So it is a wealth of income for states. It is a wealth of income for the federal government. We're talking trillions of dollars in tax revenue. So with all the debt that we have, forced distribution of these tax-infested retirement accounts, the government is looking at trillions and trillions of dollars of revenue potentially coming over the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years. So, and
they're tired of waiting, right?
Yeah.
They put a clock on that.
Yep.
So they're like, okay, we're done stretching this out. There's now a deadline.
And to your point, Ed, that got me kind of going on this tangent here, is the government essentially has made an investment. Right? Mm-hmm. You get a tax deduction today for putting money into these accounts. You're going to invest it over the long term. It's going to compound tax deferred, and we're going to get our piece down the road. Well, the government, again, gets to change the game whenever they want, essentially, when it comes to the tax rates in this country. So think about it. The tax problem, and I don't want to go too far down this road because I want you guys to talk a little bit about distribution planning and why this is important from a planning standpoint, but if your kids are going to inherit the retirement account, they're most likely working. Maybe it's a dual income household or single income household. They're 40, 45, 50 years old. Now all of a sudden they inherit a $1 million, a $2 million IRA because it grows and whatnot. It has to be fully distributed. So their income plus your retirement account most likely is going to bump them into the top tax bracket. And now you're looking at whatever the top rate is at the federal level, plus if you're in a state that has income tax, you want to add that on top of it. California, for example, I believe that would put you into an additional 13% state income tax on top of the federal government. So, and then some states even have inheritance tax, where not the federal estate tax, but the state inheritance tax that would also be subject to. And we'll get into maybe liquidity and why it's so important. You don't want to pay these taxes from the IRA whenever they become due because that just depletes it more rapidly. But yeah, I mean, I guess you just kind of got me going there, Ed, when you talked about when you brought that point up.
That was a trigger.
What a gift.
You triggered it.
Okay, so distribution planning, Nicole. You do this a lot. Unfortunately, the most difficult part of our jobs is when we work with a family for many, many years and one of the spouses passes away. We work with the kids, we work with the spouse, our team we have an entire team, they handle all the paperwork, the transfers, the rollovers, which is tremendously beneficial because it is so complex. Many of you who have dealt with this, you've had a parent pass away or somebody that you care about, banks, financial institutions, they don't make it easy to get the money that they owe you. So we have an entire team that takes care of this for our clients, but when the kids come in and we start to talk about whether it's a trust or some type of entity that was set up or just designated beneficiaries through the retirement accounts. Of course, we like to have that conversation prior to death through a family planning meeting. But if that's not the case and they come in and this is the first time we're meeting the children, it's very important to talk to them about how are we going to strategically distribute this IRA and get their financial information so we can coordinate what is the strategy.
Right. Yeah, because it's important because there is that required minimum distribution, but maybe it makes more sense for that child who's already in a high tax bracket. They don't want to get hit in that 10th year with the entire account. Maybe we spread it out and take a little bit more than that required minimum distribution. So it's not a hard and fast rule, it's just the required minimum distribution. You can take out more if you want. But you want to see how it's going to affect their tax plan. So it's a whole tax strategy. Of course, we're going to do your tax planning as our client, but it's just as important to look at how is that going to impact the beneficiary as well. Case in point, I have a client, single but only child. Her entire inheritance is from her mother. She's only child. Her mom has all her money, $3 million in an IRA. This poor woman is going to have 10 years to spend down $3 million. And that's going to be a tax nightmare for her. So that's something that we're working with to try to intervene and do what we can before the mother passes away to try to create a beneficial strategy for both of them.
Yeah, because one option is let the $3 million IRA just simply grow for 10 years and then whatever tax rates are at that point, fully distribute the whole thing, and probably 40, 45, 50%. I assume is going to be gone at that point. So let's say the account gets invested and it doubles over a 10-year period from 3 to 6 million. And now the government just takes 50% of it back and 10 years have gone by and you're right back to square one. So that's where the proactive planning leading up to the inheritance of that account is so important. I want to get into some stories about some of the things that we've seen. That's a great one to begin with. But before I do that, Ed, I want to throw you a question. Drewski posted this before we came on air tonight. So Drewski, how you doing? Thank you very much for posting the first question. And he says, if I were to take my required minimum distribution 4 times a year, would there be any benefit to scheduling them at times other than the typical quarterly dates?
From a tax perspective, no. It's all going to be accumulated as one distribution on your tax return. However, one could make a case. When I first saw this question, my first comment was you're kind of doing dollar cost averaging in reverse and maybe spreading it out, depending upon it. That's going to depend now on the investment plan. But from a tax perspective, no. Maybe from an investment plan perspective, again, maybe. Spreading that out, depending upon what happens in the market, maybe you can sell different positions at higher prices, and then if there's a decrease in the market, okay, maybe you're selling a little bit more. Yeah. But you can spread it out that way. That'd be the only, if you will, opportunity there. It's a risk because we're only talking 12 months.
Yeah, because, that makes me think of, what was it, July 16th, 18th, the day that the market dropped like 5%? What if that was the day you scheduled your required minimum distribution and now you're taking a big hit because you're taking money out while the market's down?
And then 2 weeks later, the market was right back to all-time highs.
And you could have just,
Yes. So kind of brings up the point, Drewski. What do you need the income for the required minimum distribution, or are you simply, because you can do an in-kind stock transfer. So many of our clients who don't need the required minimum distribution, we'll just go through the portfolio, identify, of course, the amount of the required minimum distribution, and then just do an in-kind distribution of those stocks or bonds directly into their non-qualified accounts. So you satisfy the RMD rule, but if you don't need the income, you don't have to sell those positions in order to take your required minimum distribution. Now, if you need the income, we could get into the difference between an ordinary annuity versus an annuity due, where if you leave money invested for the full 12 months, essentially, you have the potential to earn compound interest. And over 1 year, it's not a ton of money, most likely. But over a 20-25 year period, taking the money out at the end of the year as opposed to the beginning of the year or quarterly, mathematically, you would end up with a significant amount of more wealth. So from that standpoint, leaving the money in the account to earn interest and then take it out at the end of the year could be beneficial, quite possibly.
Because then you're essentially dollar cost averaging, but over years instead of days or months. If you're just doing it the same time of year every year.
Yeah. In reverse,
Same.
kind of like
Yeah,
what
same.
Ed was saying. You're leaving more money in there. So, Drewski, thank you very much for the question. Anyone else that has questions,
Interesting
please
thought
enter
exercise.
them into... Computer's trying to restart on me. Now is not a good time
That
for the
would be
computer to
great.
restart. Anyone else that has questions, please enter them into the chat box here. We have one more from Time Well Spent, and it's going to take us down a rabbit hole, so let's try to keep this rabbit hole not too deep. But Time Well Spent, thank you very much for entering your question. Before we get to it, we're going to do a raffle, guys. So you should see a QR code on your screen. You have the opportunity to register for this raffle. We're going to do two of them tonight, one halfway through and one at the end. And the winner of each of these raffles will receive a $100 gift card to your favorite restaurant. So sign up for that raffle. We're going to do the first one in probably about 15 minutes or so, Heather. Okay, Time Well Spent says, as part of my estate planning, I'm trying to incorporate die with zero concepts. Not worry about having enough money to last into my 90s. I do appreciate learning about rules from you guys. Well, Time Well Spent, we appreciate you tuning in to learn from us. So die with zero. So I have some pretty strong opinions about it. I'm sure you guys do as well. And before we get into that, it's not necessarily right or wrong. It's just how much risk do you want versus not risk, right? We're big proponents of having our clients spend more money in retirement because we tend to find most people don't spend enough and they end up dying with too much. So we're absolutely 100% in agreement with you there as a firm.
But my number one question when clients bring that up is, okay, when are you going to die? Nobody knows, right? So how do you know when to spend that last dollar, right? And so that's the biggest problem with that scenario.
And it's the concept itself, and there's a big book. I forget who wrote the book, possibly.
It's probably me.
I want to say Patrick Kelly, but I could be off on that. So I know there's a big, kind of like the FIRE movement, but it's kind of die with zero now is a real popular movement. It overlooks and this is personal to me because of what I went through with my family, the potential for large medical costs later in life.
Right.
So for those of you who don't know my story, the elevator pitch is, when I finished college, my grandparents who raised me, my grandfather had 2 aortic aneurysms, and I was rushed to the hospital. The doctor looked at him and said, Larry, you have 48 hours to live. We're going to airlift you to Chattanooga, Tennessee, perform a surgery. Troy, go tell your grandmother what's going on. This is happening. So I get to the hospital, my grandfather undergoes the procedure, and he's in a coma for 5 weeks. We go to a nursing home for 6 months, 2 different nursing homes. We get kicked out of the first one because I would show up every morning at 8 a.m. and he wouldn't be kept clean. I'd complain, and they'd say, Troy, we've had enough, we want you to leave. So
That's how you know your grandson loves you.
So $1 million in the first 3 years of retirement. After we got kicked out of the nursing home, Grandma and I had a conversation and said, we're going to do it ourselves. You know, no one loves this man like we do, and if he's going to get better, it's going to be because we take the time and we do it ourselves. We had to hire 2 nurses that worked 12-hour shifts, 24 hours a day at $20 an hour. It was $40,000 a month. That went on for several months. My grandfather was 64 when he had the aortic aneurysms, had just retired. The professionals that he was working with, his business attorney, the CPA who was retiring of the past 30 years, and a guy from a firm that will remain nameless, but they don't specialize in the retirement phase. They left him a gap there with no health insurance, no coverage. So $500,000 for the surgery. And that was only because we applied to Medicare and they retroactively went back to pick up the hospital bills after the surgery, but post January 1st of the year he turned 65. So the surgery took place in December. We had to pay for that. January 1st came, he didn't turn 65 until July. We got with Medicare and they went back to January 1st of the year he turned 65. So long elevator pitch, but it's a
This is a very long elevator
Very
ride.
tall building.
it's a very tall building.
What floor are we on?
So the die with zero thing, I've been through it personally. We've seen clients go through similar situations. Of course, mine is extreme from a dollar standpoint, but we don't know when we're going to die. And at the same time, we don't know what unexpected
How?
expenses may occur. Now, theoretically, if you're going to go with the die with zero concept, what are some things that you think could be beneficial? I'll throw this one over here to you, Ed. Along the lines of generating more security.
As far as generating security, I think the main reason he's trying to quote unquote die from zero is that you're trying to trying to get the most from what you've done, from the fruits of your labor through all of these years of working and saving and so on. And like you said, we tell clients all the time, I've done it personally, I have good news for you, you're not spending enough. Mm-hmm. And there's just a fear there because of the psychological part of retirement, and that has been adding to these retirement accounts for all these years, and now I'm pulling from them and the paycheck's not coming in anymore, but I digress. But I think the bigger benefit regarding die with zero is trying to leave as little to beneficiaries, because maybe they are not going to need it, or maybe there's not someone to leave it to, and so then they're just like, yeah, I've heard that before. I don't have any legacy planning because I don't care.
Yeah, that's sad. But to that point, you may not care, the survivors care, and that's really what's important with the legacy and the benefit planning. But my gold star answer to Troy's question that I got passed over is no. But when I think about that, you think, I don't know when I'm going to die, but I need money to carry me through. Well, that's where these annuities with income riders come in, because you're going to have that income. You're going to have that check coming in every month for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live. So that's one key tool that can help meet that kind of goal. But that also doesn't necessarily cover those unexpected long-term care costs or any other large expenses that come up. Because Troy, your story is, I think, everybody's personal nightmare is, what if that happens? How do I protect myself from what happened to your grandfather?
One thing I was getting at, Social Security, right? If you're going to spend money, spend it first, defer Social Security most likely, because Social Security is a guaranteed lifetime income stream. And if you get into a situation where you exhaust all the funds, I'm telling you, we have clients that have several $1 million, and one of the things they're most happy about is the strategies that we put in place, or just their Social Security income, just to see that paycheck hit every single month. There is something so comforting, whether it's Social Security, annuity income, consistent income from maybe any other investment that's very secure, a pension. There is just something comforting, and the older you get, the more valuable, from our experience, it is to just have some level of income being deposited every single month, no matter what. So considering an annuity, deferring Social Security for as long as possible, trying to get the baseline of your income up to a certain level to where if you do exhaust all your funds, you're still in a really, really good position from an income standpoint. So,
my biggest concern on the whole strategy is, I think people, on the flip side, they underestimate how long they're going to live. Mm-hmm. We run very conservative assumptions with our financial planning software for that reason. I always say that it's true, but back when I was first doing planning with some of the software back that was first being released in the early 2000s, we were running assumptions to age 80. And the clients were saying back then, no way. Here we are in 2024, and we're running them sometimes to age 95, maybe age 100. And what are they saying? No way. And so you've said it before on some of your radio shows, things that were terminal for us as humans just 10 years ago are not any longer. We won't go down that rabbit hole. There is so much technology out there. Medical advantages and so on. We
did a big event. We were the sponsor for a big event with Leukemia and Lymphoma Society Foundation. And one of the headline speakers was the doctor here in Houston. And he said just 5 years ago, there were several different leukemias that would kill people. And today they're completely treatable. So a lot of people do underestimate the life expectancy there, but we want to get back to talking about how do we maximize the wealth that you've created. And when we talk about estate planning, when we talk about family planning, really what we're trying to do is to optimize or maximize the wealth that you have. And what that means is you have a coordinated strategy, a plan that you elect, that you construct, as opposed to signing up for the plan that is already in place for you with the government. And now what that does and how that makes you feel is you can rest a little bit more comfortably knowing that the people that you love, the people that you care about, are removed from the burden, from the pain, from the hassle, the arguments, the family conflict. And that's where I want to shift this conversation now, because we see it far too often when family members come in to see us. They've inherited something, their parents didn't necessarily have any plan in place, or they're fighting with the sibling, or there's something going on. So really what this is about, it's creating a custom plan, something that you elect, not signing up for the government's plan, to really remove the burden and the family conflict that is left if you don't do something with it. And having a will is simply not an estate plan, right? It's an estate document, and it's something that is better than nothing. But guys, we were talking before the show here, we've all seen it. The most simple answer here or example is people that have come in, clients of ours, and they say, Troy, my father passed away, he left me, my siblings, the lake house over in XYZ. I want to sell it. My brother wants to keep it because it's so sentimental. My sister doesn't know what she wants to do.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, or one of them are living in it. But the father who passed away thought he had an estate plan where in his will he left the beach house or the lake house to his 3 children. I can't tell you how many times, and you guys have seen it, but I can't tell you how many times over the years I've seen this end up in the court system. I've seen families completely stop talking to one another, and not to mention the legal fees. So I threw a lot out there, but Nicole, I'll kind of toss it to you first as far as some examples or stories maybe that you've seen over the years of people who thought they had an estate plan in place by maybe just having a will or maybe no plan whatsoever in place. And what happens? And
yeah, chaos that ensues after that. It's mostly the disconnect and the discord, is everyone thinking that they knew what you wanted, and unless it's written down, nobody really knows, right? So it's just a matter of that congruency and determining what you think they wanted, where it's just so easy to put down on paper and put those instructions down, so there's no more guessing and there's no more of that back and forth bantering and all that stuff. But, you know, when I brought up somebody's living in it, there's been more than one case where they're left a home, but one of the siblings is still living in the home. But everyone else is like, but I want my equity from this. I just want to close it. I want to be done with this estate. I want to put this behind me. I want to be able to grieve and mourn and move on. But you really can't with this still looming over your head. And so it's just important to have that conversation and know exactly what your parent or whoever it was wanted to have happen to that home.
And I'd say it's even more than a conversation, right? It's actually putting the proper legal tools in place to ensure that what you want to happen happens. Ed?
I'll elaborate on that. I've seen it personally as well. It was not a client. I'll just keep it big picture and say it was a best friend. And I did not ever, I've known this person since I was 16 years old. Not to get off subject, I DJ'd his wedding. I was one of his groomsmen of his wedding. We're going back a long time.
Ed.
It was actually Edger, but anyway, I digress. Middle initial is J.
I knew the DJ. I didn't know it was Edger.
EJR is my initials. Get
Okay.
it?
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, people are already losing interest by the second year.
Edgy.
Parents passed away. They had, you know, you're not going to let me live that down, are you? And neither is the world now that they know.
Guess who now has a name?
How many emails from clients are you going to have?
Let's just see how YouTube blows up on this one.
Can I put a request in for an appearance for DJ
After the
Edger?
show, guys, after the show.
We'll send out his calendar.
Bottom line, wanted to keep it. They had a lake house. I visited it when we were in college, my brother and I. Beautiful location in Florida. I'll just say that it wasn't just himself and his 2 siblings that came into the picture, because it was not clear. There's wives and husbands that come into the picture. They have their own, I think it should be this
Strong
way.
opinions.
Yeah. So again, I never asked, it was none of my business, so I don't know how that turned out. But again, there was an additional element there, and I knew when he told me some of the things that were coming up, I was like, I know who's thinking about that. And I'm not saying they're wrong, I'm not making judgment calls here, but again, without the plan, it can lead to chaos for the survivors. And so that's another reason that you want to have a plan as well.
You mentioned the spouses, the spousal protection. That's something I make sure to ask clients and be like, okay, how many kids do you have? Are they married? do you trust the spouse? Do you like the spouse? Whether or not you trust them, we still want to have some kind of protections. You truly never know, what somebody's ultimately thinking. And you want to make sure that your wishes and desires don't get abused or don't get trampled on.
Because what you're talking about is, let's say you have $1 million and you leave it 50-50 to your 2 children. Well, half of that money that you leave to one child could potentially go, without proper planning, to your child's future ex-spouse. So that's a great segue into trusts and more strategic planning around the disposition of your estate, which we're going to pick up right after the raffle. So
Right after
if you've not registered for the first raffle, we're going to give you 30 seconds, Heather. Let's give them 30 seconds to go ahead and get registered. We're going to do a raffle now, and one more at the end of tonight's show. $100 gift card to your favorite restaurant. So there's a QR code on your screen. If you scan that and register, you will be in this raffle and also the one at the end of the show. We're going to give you about 30 seconds to do that now. While you get registered, if you have not already, before we do the raffle, trusts. There are so many misconceptions about trusts. Ed, I just want to ask you a simple question. What is the purpose of a revocable living trust?
Control from the grave, I would say, is one of the first answers that comes to
Revocable living trust.
Revocable, correct.
Okay.
Not an irrevocable, or revocable. Yeah, they generally become irrevocable. And I will say, when it comes to trust, I always say it's like designing a custom home. You can do anything you want with them, but that's the first answer that comes to mind.
Are we ready? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to pick the trust discussion back up, and we have our first winner for the raffle tonight. And who is it, Heather? Robert Roush.
Oh, Bob.
Oh, Robert, how you doing? Bob, congratulations, and thank you very much for tuning in tonight and registering for the raffle. Heather from our marketing department will be in contact with you. Bob, thank you very much for tuning in. Okay, so what I was going to get at there was instructions, right? It's a kind of a will, so to speak, but correct. Maybe not necessarily control from the grave or a ton of control from the grave, but bypass probate, go to whomever you want the money to go to. But ultimately, if it's a revocable trust and the kids or grandkids receive the money, if they want to take it out of the trust and do what they want to do with it, they'll have those choices. But one of the big misconceptions, and probably I should have been more clear with the question,
It was broad.
we see all the time people, they come in and they say, Troy, well, I have this trust for my attorney, and my assets are protected. I'm good. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's just a basic family trust, revocable living trust. There is no asset protection. There is nothing for the kids. There's nothing for the grandkids as far as asset protection. During your life, there's no asset protection. It's essentially a will that bypasses probate. So different types of trust. Now, literally, there are hundreds and hundreds of trusts out there, if not thousands of trusts. We're going to keep it very, very high level here.
We're going to go over each one.
Get your pen and paper.
Get your pen and paper. There will be a quiz.
So just real high level, how do trusts fit into the conversation when it comes to family planning, controlling your wealth, or dictating to whom and how much and under what terms your wealth is distributed to the people that you care about? And we have a question about IRAs and charity that we're going to get to in just a minute from Thomas Felkai. So Thomas, hang on one second. We're going to get to your question in just a minute. But trust in general, Nicole, what are they? What are some of the misconceptions and what should people know?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, the main thing is to bypass probate. And what happens in probate is people can argue over your stuff, or it becomes public knowledge what you have. If it stays within a trust, it's still private. Not everybody knows what you passed away and left behind. And it comes with specific instructions on here's what I want to have happen with those assets afterwards. And it's a much harder to then contest that if somebody disagrees. But it's more of, and to what Ed's point was just dictating or being more specific around where you want that to go.
Yeah, and in bypassing the probate process, which the probate process, some states are far more complicated than others, but it removes the judge from the equation. It makes it a bit more difficult for a family member to contest the revocable living trust, for example, as opposed to the will. Wills are very easily contestable, often overturned, and we see it, I can't count how many times I've seen it in my career where the will was created 25 years ago. You know, and
Or it's handwritten.
yeah.
Those are my favorite.
And there were children that had not yet been born, and the will was created, you know, prior to that. The worst one I've ever seen was someone's ex-wife was the beneficiary of all the retirement accounts, all the assets inside the will. So when we got the documents, as part of our retirement success plan here, it's a 5-step process. The step 5 is the estate planning, the family planning. So I start reviewing everything, and I'm going through it, and you know, I ask him, I say, "Who's Eleanor?" He says, "How do you know that name?"
I Googled you.
I says, "Well, she seems to be pretty important to you, sir, because every single dollar that you own is going to her." He says, "What do you mean? What do you mean? That's not true." And sure enough, in the will, he had not changed it in decades. Every single thing had been going to him. The 401k, when he first got his job 30 years ago, he put her down as the beneficiary, never took the time to go in and change it. And we're talking a couple $1,000,000 here.
Had
Needless
she
to say-
known, this could have been an episode of Dateline.
Yeah, yeah. Forensic Files. So this brings up another point, though, that designated beneficiaries trump your will. Now, there's a, you know, in our industry, it's I'm going to call it a popular case going on right now. It's been settled prior at the Supreme Court, but every once in a while, this happens where someone is left as a designated beneficiary that the person who died did not intend. They just simply didn't change the paperwork. It's going through the court process again now. I just read a pretty big article about it. And of course, it's going to be denied because designated beneficiaries trump whatever is in your will. So your retirement accounts, your Roth IRA, your trust. Now, you could get complicated if you actually created a trust to own your IRA, and the IRA itself had beneficiaries listed, but the trust itself had its own beneficiaries. That's above my pay grade. I need an attorney to chime in on that. But designated beneficiaries trump the will and any trust document that you have, assuming that scenario where the IRA is not inside the trust. So we've seen that a lot. But mistakes, guys. What are some of the mistakes that you've seen over the years?
I just had one until you asked me, and then I went blank.
I'll jump in. Yeah, hurry, we
thinking.
got plenty of time.
Go ahead.
No, I would say some of the biggest mistakes I see is to what you mentioned, Troy, and that is a trust is set up by the attorney. And the attorney's like, there you go, there's a trust, thank you for your business. They will also give instructions as far as, okay, now you need to take this to your advisor or on your own, change your beneficiaries accordingly, maybe making the trust the contingent beneficiary where nothing
Or the
existed.
primary beneficiary.
Or the primary. I mean, it's again designed by, that's why you want to get an attorney involved.
Yeah.
But they don't. Life gets busy, life gets in the way. And so, yes, then you end up down the road realizing that they didn't do it. I bet I have a trust. Yes, but you did not take that additional step and update your beneficiaries per the attorney's instructions.
Or fund the trust.
That's another one.
Right. So when we see this all the time. I mean, 70% of the time, I'd say. And here's the main point: when you are doing this type of planning, please include your financial advisor. They should need to be a qualified financial advisor, right? Not someone who doesn't have the expertise to help with these types of matters. But please include the financial advisor. Include them in the meetings with your attorney. Include them pre-planning before you even go to the attorney, before you even sit down to discuss which legal documents that you're going to implement as part of your estate plan. A qualified, certified financial planner professional, somebody who has the capability to have an intelligent conversation with you about the potential directions that you could go from a planning standpoint is an extremely valuable step. And I would highly recommend you have that advisor with you on that meeting with the attorney, and you should interview a few attorneys, at least 2, because in my experience, I don't want to throw any attorneys under the bus out there, but I've seen it enough in my career to pretty confidently state that many attorneys, they do similar things no matter who the client is that comes in or what their situation is. whether it's a certain type of trust strategy or LLC strategy or whatever it might be, it's very common to see the same strategy done over and over again through that similar firm. There's
The attorney's like the hammer and everybody looks like a nail.
yeah, right. You come in, you get the revocable trust, you get this, you get that, you get this, you get that. Those are basic documents that most people do need, but I would recommend interviewing a few different attorneys, at least a couple, and include your advisor in that process, because the advisor, first and foremost, what we're going to be able to do is to really translate for you, right? When the attorney is having these conversations about different directions that you could go with your estate plan or what they're recommending to implement, most people, it's way over their head. I mean, you could be a super sophisticated individual and, you know, engineer, or whatever it might be. That's not your discipline. It's not your area of expertise. And, you know, oftentimes people don't want to look stupid in front of certain professionals, and questions that they may have, they don't ask. And yeah, sounds good, you know, sign me up. And that's where you get into, well, I have these different trusts, but then I never retitled my assets in the name of the trust, and that's how you transfer money into a trust, is by retitling those assets. Or I've never changed the beneficiaries of my retirement accounts or my other accounts so they flow into those trusts and then can be distributed according to my wishes when the time comes. Or the one I've seen several times in my career, the wrong attorney drafts the trust document, gives you that thing that you talked about, Ed. Here's your directions. Go change all your beneficiaries. And we've seen people change their beneficiaries without consulting with us first, of their retirement account to the trust. And unless the trust has very specific language in it to accept IRA money, then it will become a fully taxable distribution once the money comes out of the IRA and goes into that trust.
To the estate.
Yeah.
At a 40% tax rate.
So I've seen that happen a few times. Once just 2 years ago, and it created a several $100,000 tax obligation. So I guess, you know, might have a lack of direction as far as the particular topics that we're covering here, but we have a ton of experience, and I hope these stories can really help you get to thinking as far as what you've done to really implement the strategies or decisions that you have in your life on paper to make sure that you don't make some of these mistakes. And I hope that's really kind of the big takeaway.
And I also come across people wanting to leave money to their grandchildren. You know, like my kids, they make their own money, or I want to leave this to my grandchildren, help fund their education, whatever. But if they're still a minor and you name a minor as a beneficiary, it's going to go to their parent anyways, right? It's going to go to their guardian. So you want to be aware of those things. If you're just have a newborn grandchild and you're planning all your beneficiaries, you want to make sure that you're aware of what's really going to happen if and when that specific event actually takes place. So it's just a matter of knowing how that money is going to flow from one account to the next.
Okay, Thomas says, how does a charitable distribution affect the taxes on an IRA?
Charitable distribution.
Ed, I throw that one out to you. I believe he's talking about,
Are you talking about qualified
QCDs?
charitable
Yeah,
distribution?
I'm going to go ahead and make the assumption, and hey Tom, good to see you. Thank you for joining in. I think I'm going to assume that he's talking about qualified charitable donations. And bottom line, when it comes to required minimum distributions, and you can do it, I think it's 70 and a half now is when you can start taking
Still
advantage
70
of
and a half.
this. So I don't want to go down that road. I'll let you go down that road as far as new RMD ages. But let's assume that you are required minimum distribution age, to keep things simple, whatever that is, 73, 75, or later. And you don't need the money, maybe you're more charitably inclined, you can take that required minimum distribution, up to 100,000 is the limit, take that required minimum distribution and send it directly to a 501(c)(3) charity. The benefit there is you're handling your required minimum distribution. The other benefit is that you're not taxed on that money then, so it does not go on your tax return. So assuming, again, Tom, that's what you're asking, I think that's the way I would approach that.
Yeah, and so charitable planning, right? It oftentimes can change once you hit 70 and a half. So because of this qualified charitable distribution rule. So charitable planning is, again, very complex part of the tax code, depending on what type of assets you have. That determines what percentage of your adjusted gross income you can take an income tax deduction for. But once you hit 70 and a half, 100% of your IRA distribution up to, is it 100,000 right now? 100,000, 100% deductible, no taxes are due on that distribution from your retirement account.
You don't it. You just don't even claim it as income.
Yep.
It's like it didn't happen. And
Yep.
correct me if I'm
Which
wrong.
is shocking,
I don't
right?
get to correct Troy very much. I corrected Troy.
Well, we're going to talk after this anyway. Also, not to get off that, but just to go a little bit down this rabbit hole, with the Secure Act 2.0, aren't they going to start adjusting the qualified charitable donation for inflation every year to where it goes up, or is that something else?
That's on the to be continued part of the Secure Act, where we
Gotcha.
still do not have
That's
final
the
guidance.
That's the dot. Okay.
And so I want to just point out, so it was an investment advisor, I should say financial planner, inside joke there when Ed said that I'll let you go into the RMD ages, because RMDs used to be 70 and a half. That's when you had to start distributing from your retirement account. But then they changed to 72, then they changed to 73 or 75, depending on when you're born. I recently read the new Secure Act finally clarified if you were age 74, there was some discrepancy where they weren't quite sure when you take RMDs. But the point is they changed very, very frequently over the past few years, but qualified charitable distributions remained at 70 and a half.
70 and a half.
Yeah, and to that point, I have a client who we discussed, are we going to do Roth conversions? What are we going to do? And the purpose behind Roth conversions is, ultimately to save taxes. Why? Because a lot of people don't agree with the way the government spends your tax dollars. And so I had a client who, she was like, instead of Roth conversions or, that kind of thing, I would rather give my money to an organization that I know is going to spend my funds in a way that I appreciate. So, it's just another way of being able to handle how you want your funds to be spent, and instead of going to the IRS, who then gives the tax dollars to the government, and who knows where it goes after that.
Okay, Thomas, thank you very much for that question. Hopefully that answered exactly what you were looking for there. I believe that's what you were talking about. From Caring Citizen, small business owner, agrees about the necessity of having the plan. I'm updating my estate plan docs at this time, revocable trust, powers of attorney, etc. So important. Do they get outdated? Yes. Yes, they do, of course. I guess outdated for those documents are just basic, right? They're something that every single person should have. So if you pass away, then at least you've provided some input to the judge, who is ultimately going to be responsible for the disposition of your estate. But that's like the bare minimum, right? What was that movie with the flare and the restaurants?
Oh.
Nicole, you know what I'm talking about. Office Space.
I was going to say, is it Office Space?
So if any of you have seen Office Space, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's the flare, the person's working at the restaurant. They highly recommend you have all these buttons on your vest, and they call it flare. And then the person would only do the bare minimum. And he'd always come in and he'd say, well, you just hit the bare minimum today. You didn't really go above and beyond. And that's kind of what I feel like these documents are, that every single attorney is going to do for you. They're going to charge anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 typically. These are prepackaged, pretty simple, straightforward designs. The attorney may take a little bit of time to do some customization, but these are the bare minimum, right? There's just a couple of buttons on the vest. You're not really doing enough to really
fill in the blank.
Yes. Because wills can be overturned, right? Blended families. I want to get into blended families tonight. I can't tell you how many times over the years the will says, I want to give money to my new spouse, but the old spouse and the children from that previous marriage, guess what? They don't necessarily agree with the money going to the new spouse, right? Because the new spouse, once the money goes to her, she can do whatever she chooses. She can completely disinherit the children from your previous marriage. So guess what happens? They sue, she gets an attorney, everyone is in court fighting for the next 5 years, and the attorneys, of course, are the only people that win. So that's what happens with a will. You want to take that, typically, depending on how much wealth there is and how important this is to you, typically you want to take that a step above and beyond to become very, very clear with more, let's call it ironclad legal instruments to further clarify, really remove the judge from the equation, because the will is not completely, it's not rock solid, right? You know, a will can be overturned. You start to get into trust, you start to get into legal entities like family limited partnerships, other structures, far more precedent, far more case law, far more strong when it comes to ensuring your wishes are carried out to what you want to happen. So Office Space, I'm glad I remembered that. Ed, do you see Office Space?
Only a couple of times.
I'm kicking myself because I can't remember the name of the restaurant. And it wasn't Tchotchke's.
Tchotchke's.
Is that what it was? Tchotchke's?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay, so good job on getting that done.
That's what I've been thinking about while you've been talking.
Ed, how many times would you say? I mean, it's very uncommon. It's very common for clients that we sit with. You know, they come over from the big firm. They come over here. You know, they're 60 years old, 62 years old, and they don't have any will. They don't have a will.
No.
You know, how often do you see that?
I would say if I had to put a number on it, at least 75% of the time. They literally have absolutely no estate documents in place whatsoever.
75%, really?
75 is what my experience
I was
is.
going to say 60.
No, that's my experience.
Well, you have way more experience.
I
than
wouldn't
do.
say that.
I'm not calling you old or anything.
No, that's the
You
right
have-
here telling me I'm old, but no. No, I'm just saying, generally in my role, I meet with potential clients first. They provide what we call a financial questionnaire that gives us kind of a baseline to start getting an idea of where they stand. And we have a whole section that asks about your estate documents. And for a majority of times, it's blank. I will ask during the first meeting, is this correct? Because sometimes they're like, I didn't want to fill it out, or I don't remember the date, so I just kind of skipped over it. I figured you'd ask. But a lot of times, like, no, I did not touch on that whatsoever.
And that's the thing people drag their feet on the longest too. I can't tell you how many clients every time we sit down, have you talked to an attorney? Have you talked to an attorney? I will sit with you, just, you know, because, and what's one thing I tell them is you don't know what you don't know about estate planning. And so that's another reason we're happy to sit in on that meeting with you, but it needs to just happen. Just make it a priority to just, because like I said, nobody knows that the day that they're going to die. And if you haven't put a plan in place, the government has a plan for you. May not be the same plan that you want. If you keep kicking that can down the road, you're taking a bigger and bigger risk.
Yeah. And the thing that you said there that I want everyone to really kind of take away is have the advisor with you, right? Because, I mean, we've been doing this for a long time and we have specific education and expertise in this area, but understanding the law when it comes to estate planning and different types of trusts and even IRAs, distribution planning, this stuff is tremendously complex. And even with the wealth of experience that we have in the education, it's still very, very confusing. It's still very complex. So one of the biggest roles that we play in that entire attorney, client, investment advisor, financial planner relationship is helping you to understand what the attorney is actually saying and what that means for you.
And how into your current financial plan, because the attorney doesn't necessarily know what your plan is, and so that's also part of our role, is to make sure it fits into what we're kind of already planning, but helping us understand why we might need to shift something because of what an attorney may recommend.
And also make sure we follow through
Exactly,
to where
and
once
that
it's
follow
actually
through.
created, okay, now we need to do this additional step
Now
from
here's
funding
our
it to
to-do
changing
list.
beneficiaries and so on.
I've worked with, if I haven't worked with 25, 30 different attorneys on behalf of clients, I haven't worked with a single one. And I've never once come across an attorney firm where they actually follow up to make sure that you have retitled your accounts, changed your beneficiaries, and the administrative requirements that come with an estate plan. If you set a trust up, I'll give you a good example.
Deed transfers.
The flow of money when you own a trust is extremely important because you have assets that are inside of your estate, and then a lot of trusts are set up outside of your estate for asset protection. If you have access to that money, meaning you can go in willy-nilly and take it out, you have no asset protection. This is where revocable living trusts fall short and many other trusts that you have access to the money. You set up a revocable living trust, or excuse me, irrevocable trust, it's outside of the estate. When you gift assets into that estate, a couple of things must take place. First, you must file a gift tax return because it is a gift into an entity outside of your estate. Second, the money must flow into properly or a proper flow of accounts. So this could get very complex here, but let's say you're going to partition some assets off in the name of your spouse because we're in a community property state. The money needs to go into her account first, and then from her account, it would need to go into a bank account, quite possibly of the trust, most likely of the trust. But then the trustee, whoever is named the trustee, it could be a third-party trustee, it could be some independent person, or it could be that particular spouse. Whoever that is, that person is the one who actually needs to make the payment to different entities that may also be involved. So the flow of money is very important, and
documenting it.
And documenting and keeping records, because if you pass away and the government says, okay, you have this fancy estate plan in place, good for you, really, really good for you. You outsmarted us. Now let me see the past 10 years of records, and let me see if I can poke holes in it and still get your money, because that's what happens. And that's where the financial advisor is going to play a very, very important role, the proper financial advisor, because many people, this is just way beyond their head, and they don't have the education. When it comes to estate planning, family planning, financial planning, really, most financial advisors simply help you buy mutual funds and
manage your investments.
Manage your investments.
It's an investment-only relationship, is how it's been described.
A lot of people. So
for a lot of people.
Okay, so making sure that stuff is documented. That's really where the proper financial planner comes involved. So talk to your advisor about it. If you're a client here, we're going to take care of this, of course, for you. But make sure you're working with someone, whether it's us or someone in your area that you trust. Make sure that these are the things that they are aware of, that they're helping you with, and that you're documenting as you go along. Okay, so we have the second raffle upcoming in just 5 minutes here. So we're going to do it in 5 minutes, because if you're just tuning in, you should see a QR code on your screen, and this gives you the opportunity to one, receive the Trump Tax ebook that we will send you once you register. But of course, you're going to be entered to win a $100 gift card to your favorite restaurant. Our marketing department will be in contact with you to learn which restaurant that is if you win. And
if it's also our favorite restaurant, guess you might just show up with. Yeah? Okay.
I'm laughing about
Just
something
me.
else. I'll tell Troy about that in a second.
Okay.
So register for the raffle. We're going to do that in 5 minutes if you have not already. But while we are waiting for the newcomers to have the opportunity to win the raffle, we have a few more questions that are input. And I want to say hello to Fast Eddie. I think Fast Eddie is our #1 live stream attendee. Fast Eddie, I believe you've attended almost everyone for probably the past 18 months or so, and I think we've been doing them about that long. So Fast Eddie, we really, really appreciate you. I don't even know if you're a client, Fast Eddie. Let me know if you're a client, if you're still watching. But I do appreciate you tuning in all the time and participating and letting me know that you're here. It means a lot. Okay.
Can I just say one thing? One key takeaway that I know.
It's your world, Nicole. I'm just living it.
It's my show, at least. But one thing that I learned later in life that I think that most people should know, we talk about beneficiaries on our IRAs and all that. Most people don't realize you can do that on your bank accounts, your checking accounts, your savings accounts. Otherwise, that gets tied up in probate. So if you haven't already, tomorrow, go to your bank or go online and list, they call it a payable on death, or POD. List who you want to receive your checking account, your savings account, just those little accounts, because it's just so much easier if something happens to you. Now that beneficiary can use those funds to help cover your final expenses rather than waiting for probate to go through. And now they're spending their own dollars to bury you, waiting to be able to pay themselves back.
Yeah, because from my experience, banks are still going to make it tremendously difficult for you to get that money. And many of you probably have already gone through this with the death of your parents or someone that you know if you were named executor or responsible for getting those funds. But even if you have that payable on death form, which are 100% accurate, it bypasses the entire probate process and speeds up, depending on which state you live in, several months in the ability to start the process of accessing that money. But with that POD form, you still have to start the process of accessing the money. And it's just funny how banks have these tremendously complex systems to when you want to make a claim and you call in, you get rerouted to different department after different department. They typically only accept mail. And it still takes
Physical
months,
mail.
oftentimes, to get the money that you've been named on that form. But good point. Second point here, you will increase your FDIC insurance limit up to, I want to say it's $1.25 million. So $250,000 per beneficiary for every POD beneficiary that you have on your bank account. So That's a bonus.
I think
This
something
is
to
my
add as
show,
well.
Troy. Quit showing off.
Ed, let Nicole go.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak. Nicole, you
may
continue.
speak now.
Can I speak now, Nicole? No, I think it's important because I've also said the same thing to clients. And the one thing they'll say, but yes, payable on death, that's still a beneficiary conversation. You are not giving these individuals any power on your checking account while you are still alive.
Yeah.
That's a common misconception. And so a lot of times though, and I'm going to go down a rabbit hole, I'm going to try not to, but a lot of times I will see, let's call it a parent, and then one of their children, they'll put them on the account as a joint owner because they want them to have that ability. Generally speaking, and again, I don't want to go too far, that's usually not a good idea as well. Not a bad idea, don't get me wrong, it's not something like, oh my
There's
gosh.
better ways.
But there are, again, it's not, I said it
You
before.
start to bring gift tax concerns in, especially if
Correct.
they go in and now
Cost
they take a
basis.
distribution from that account.
Now that, yeah, so it just, again, it's convenient. I just put them on there. It was a form, I put them on there, and it's been very, very smooth. But there are, as Nicole said, it's what you're doing is good. You're giving them some control. What is better are other options. So just wanted to bring that out there.
Okay, so we have another question. We're going to do the raffle. I believe we have the winner right now. Valadi has a question. We're going to get to that right
She's like,
after
"That's
we
not
do
the winner."
right after we do the raffle here. So Heather, who's our next winner?
It's Drew Goddard.
Drew Goddard. Drew, congratulations. You are the winner of our second raffle. Our marketing team will be in contact to identify your favorite restaurant, and they'll get that $100 gift card out for you. Now, the good news is, if you didn't win the raffle, there is still a much more valuable document, and it is the Trump Tax ebook. So if you have not registered, I'm serious here, because it is really save a lot of money here when
priceless.
you start to understand how to plan. It's my corny sense of humor, but I do think it's much more valuable. Okay, so he says, do I need to fund the trust with my TSP, IRA, Roth IRA accounts? Fund the trust, I don't know if you mean retitling. The simple answer is most likely going to be no here, but I recommend you talk to an attorney. IRAs are their own separate legal entities. There's no reason to...
They're already sheltered.
There's no benefit of doing that. Again, I'm not an attorney, and I'm not providing you legal advice here, just generally speaking from an educational standpoint, an IRA is essentially kind of like a trust already, a retirement account, a Roth. Your TSP, it's a retirement plan subject to ERISA, so it has tremendous federal protection already. It's stronger probably than most trusts out there. Mm-hmm. It's the beneficiary designations. So if you change the beneficiary of those accounts to a trust, the trust itself needs to have the appropriate language to accept that money, which segues quite perfectly into, I saw a client question here from Philip. Philip Herring, he says, as a client, will you review my trust I already have set up to screen for the language needed to include IRAs? Philip, I wish we could do that. We can take a look at it, but we're not attorneys. We don't want that responsibility. The law is ever changing in that world, just like it is in the financial planning world. We do have several attorneys we could recommend to you. Most of them will do it at no cost whatsoever because they're going to look at what you have. If they can identify some opportunity to help you improve it, they can make recommendations. Maybe they'll make some money. But most attorneys will look at that at no charge whatsoever. And we want to keep that in the silo of legal advice. So it's not something that we'll necessarily do, but we'll definitely get you pointed in the right direction to get that taken care of for you.
But we'll sit in the room, like we said.
Right. If needed. If they start to create some proposals, and because here's the thing with attorneys, and this has been, and I didn't realize I was going to kind of bang on attorneys so much tonight. You can kind of see how much I care for attorneys.
Well, I think that I'm going to shut it.
Yeah. So, look, here's the truth, right? Most attorneys, highly intelligent, highly educated, really, really good people. But ultimately, their job is to sell things, right? Just like a financial advisor, just like a CPA selling their services, just like a real estate person. So ultimately, there's that balance between what is appropriate for me versus, what is this person selling. And I'm not saying people do a good job or a bad job, or they act for or against your interests. But it's just the truth of the matter, right? So, you want to have that extra person there. It's just like when people come in to see us. If you want to bring your kid, your CPA, your attorney, your current advisor, please do. right? Please bring your current advisor, because I would love to have that conversation about everything they've not done that they should be doing. Bring your attorney, bring your CPA, bring them all. We welcome that. And that's the same thing with having the advisor in the room when you meet with that attorney. So, okay. Daryl says, does Oak Harvest automatically require minimum distributions? As a fiduciary, we do have that responsibility. We are not going to automatically distribute it, but we are going to automatically call you several times until you pick up the phone. And if you don't pick up the phone, I don't know what we would do.
Quit
Would we
ignoring me,
automatically
Dad.
distribute it?
Dad, answer the phone.
I don't think so. But yeah, no, we do have a responsibility to make sure that gets done, and we will make sure that gets done. We'll put you on the list there. If you are a client, Daryl, it's very important.
That's my dad.
Is it? Yeah?
That's why I said, quit ignoring me, Dad. Pick up the phone.
Oh, hi, Daryl. I owe you a round of golf at Carlton Woods. So,
Yes.
So let me know when you want to play. Okay, guys, we're here at 7:10. We're kind of wrapping it up here. Lewis says, I'm sure a savvy attorney can do an asset search and find out if your estate assets are protected. Excellent point. If your assets are properly protected, a savvy attorney would not be able to find them. So no, he would not be able to do that. And, well, I'm not going to get into the different financial tools, I guess, that could protect your assets, because people in many different states are watching this, and there are various limitations, not just for certain financial tools, but also for retirement accounts. IRAs and Roth IRAs and inherited IRAs. But no, Lewis, that is the whole point with asset protection, is they're outside of your estate, so they're not technically owned by you. Maybe there's some unsavory ways that they can maybe gather some information. Not quite sure about that, but if properly structured, I do know this, there is a high degree of confidentiality, not just from the courts as you're going through the probate process, but from public officials, from attorneys, from private citizens, all that. Okay, guys, ton of information. I know we didn't get to half of what we had on our list tonight, but we still have plenty of people here watching right now. Final
Well, I'll
important
elaborate.
talks?
We talked about this before we went live tonight, and that is unsavory. Characters looking for, if you will, opportunities in this world of estates going through probate. That generally becomes public knowledge. I had it happen to me personally when I lost one of my parents, where after it was a minimum of 2 years, it might have been 3, not that it matters, but it was literally multiple years afterwards, where my sister, who was executrix of my father's estate upon his passing, got a call out of the blue claiming, I'm an attorney. We noticed because of probate that your father's estate had a number of rental properties, and we have a delivery driver that claims about 3 or 4 years ago that he fell on said property, and now he's going to bring a lawsuit against you. So I got the phone call from her, and she's like, what do I do? And at the time I was like, well, there's nothing you can do. The estate had been distributed, and she told him that, best of luck. But point being, yes, there are unsavory characters out there looking for those opportunities. I don't know if they'd be savvy enough to get past the law as far as something that didn't go through probate, but this person was obviously just looking for what I call low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, so here's the thing, when you create an irrevocable trust, for example, and you get something outside of your estate, you don't name it, if your name's James Washington, you don't name it the James Washington Irrevocable Trust. The attorney will be able to find that, right? But you name it the XYZ, whatever. And therefore, when someone does a search for these different types of entities out there, they're not going to be able to find it. LLCs, family limited partnerships, C Corps, whatever entity that you're using to create these more complex structures, don't put your names on it. Let's be a little bit creative here with how we're naming things, because certain things do get filed with the state in order to receive certain certificates to be a valid legal entity. So yeah, I mean, scams too, right? We have tons of scams out there. I don't know if we want to kind of go down that path, but
That should be its own show.
yeah, it should be its own show
That's
there.
gonna
Charitable
be a lot.
planning, guys. We still have, this is valuable stuff. Let's get into charitable planning for a few minutes. I want to talk about inheriting retirement account assets versus inheriting non-retirement account assets. Some of the tax benefits or tax costs of making decisions when it comes to those different assets. So let's say we have a client and he has an IRA and he has a non-qualified account with highly appreciated stock. Sometimes what we'll see is they plan on giving the stock to charity and the IRA split amongst 2 or 3 different beneficiaries. So what's the problem with that strategy?
Go ahead, Nicole.
Problem there is with the IRA assets, whoever inherits those has to pay those taxes, right? Other than unless it's a charity that receives those assets. A charity doesn't have to pay taxes on any funds that they receive. But if you're receiving highly appreciated assets or any kind of appreciated asset, you get what's called a stepped up cost basis, meaning you only pay capital gains on any appreciation that happened after the date of death. So then you're saving, so let's say your parents bought Apple in the 80s and they held on to it this whole time. You can go ahead and sell those shares and you're not going to owe a penny of taxes on those Apple shares. So it's just a more tax efficient way to be able to plan and monitor your whole system.
And I'm going to give you a chance to jump in there, but I want to say real quick, this is a very good example of how estate planning is more of a financial planning item, right? Because you go to the attorney, you say, I want to have this plan in place with the documents. The attorney drafts the documents, but they don't know the beneficiaries, the different structures and the cost basis of your accounts. So just a really good example there of why it's so important to include the financial planner with the attorney, with the discussion, as I said earlier, the pre-discussion before you even go to the attorney, so you can be on the same page as far as what you're trying to accomplish. And really how I do it for my clients that I work with, I contact the attorney on their behalf and very clearly explain what we're looking to do, have a pre-conversation with the attorney. What are you thinking? How can we strategize this? And then once I kind of feel comfortable with that, I'm going to bring the client in to meet the attorney and go through those options or those choices. So summarize, leaving the IRA to charity, the charity does not have to pay income taxes on that bequeath, on that inheritance, and leaving the non-qualified stocks, the outside the retirement account stocks that have appreciated in value to your children, they receive a step up in basis. They're not paying taxes on it either. Voila. No taxes paid whatsoever on that retirement.
It's like magic.
Now, many people, of course, don't want to donate a $500,000 or $1 million or a $2 million retirement account to charity. But conceptually speaking, when you look at, we see it all the time, I want to leave $50,000 to the charity upon my death. Well, here's something that I try to do with clients, again, all the time. Don't leave it to them upon your death. One, they want it now. But two, there's no tax benefit to you if you leave it upon your death. Leave it to them, give it to them while you're living, right? Again, you take highly appreciated stock, you give it to charity while you're living. I believe it's 30% of your adjusted gross income. We can take an income tax deduction today while you're living. The charity gets the money much sooner. If you give them $50,000, that's going to save you about $15,000 in taxes, 30% of that $50,000. If you leave it to them upon your death, there's no tax benefit whatsoever. So understanding and coordinating the proper distribution of your assets to the people to whom you wish to receive can create more benefits to you while you're living, but of course be more strategic upon death as well.
I'll elaborate, and like you said, and that is part of our retirement success plan. You have to look at everything holistically in order to make the best decisions from a visibility perspective. This is a great example of how estate planning, family planning will have an effect on your tax plan. Leaving money to kids in an IRA, yes, it's all taxable to them. The stretch IRA for a majority of Americans is gone. They're probably working themselves, so you've got all that income going on top of their income. Maybe you're inadvertent. You mean the best. You want your kids to always be more successful, for the most part, than you are. But at the same time, I've seen the otherwise. But I won't go down that road. We work with hundreds of people. It's so much fun working here. But I digress. But yes, one decision will have an effect on another. Mm-hmm. It can't just be looking only at the estate plan, only the investments. That's the one we mostly run into.
Yeah, and that's, to elaborate on that point, when people say, oh, my friend told me I need to do this, because that's what my advisor told me to do. well, your plan's not the same as your friend's plan. And, you know, so it's, you got to look at it from the whole context of your plan and not what your friend thinks is the best thing in the world.
I almost fired a client one time because we were having a conversation about what we were doing. And he said, well, Troy, I was talking to my plumber when he was over fixing the toilet, and he told me what you're doing is wrong. I kid you not.
Bring that plumber here right now.
I tried to have a very rational conversation about how the plumber was not qualified to tell me what I was doing was wrong.
Let me see his credentials.
But literally that went on for like 10 minutes. And finally got to the point where I was like,
advice?
look, if you're going to trust a plumber over me, I'm not sure you're in the right place.
You're not a good fit.
And it might not be a good fit for here. But we talked about this before we came on air tonight. A good example, and I like to share this story with everyone. NVIDIA stock, right? You had someone mention that they were going to gift NVIDIA stock. Well, I'll let you tell the story.
Well, yeah, no, that was just it. We were talking about gifting strategies, ways to reduce their estate value because they were worried about having to encounter estate tax issues down the road. And he's like, yeah, so-and-so, I can't remember who it was, recommended to him, I need to gift my son this NVIDIA stock. It's this highly appreciated asset. They bought it a long time ago because they didn't want to pay the capital gains on it. And I'm like, just thinking through the whole cost basis scenario, I'm like, well, why would you gift that? Now your son is going to have to pay the capital gains on that versus, you know, if they inherit that same stock, now they don't have to pay the capital gains on it. So, I mean, I went through mental, you know, hurdles trying to figure out why someone would tell him to do that. But I don't know the context in which the friend gave that advice or, you know, wherever that advice came from, if it was even qualified. Maybe the plumber told him to do that. I don't know.
Yeah. But it's not sound advice, right? Because if you pass the NVIDIA stock on, theoretically you own it. If you don't plan on selling it, it's going to get a stepped up cost basis. Whereas if you gift it to your son during your life, anything above $17,000 would be subject to gift tax.
18.
Is it 18 now? Yep.
That's 2.
That is 2.
It's going to be a long night after we get off air.
And then the thing is, a lot of times people don't know that they need to file that gift tax return claiming that they've given a gift above the $18,000 limit. So.
I am beaming.
Yes. Okay, non-titleable, how horrible for a non-spouse to get HSA account, GeoPepsi. GeoPepsi, did you not, you were one of the viewers, I believe, one of our very, very first live streams, I believe. I could be wrong. But wow, how horrible. He's just making a comment about the story that we shared earlier. Thanks for the live stream, Lewis said. All right, guys, we still have a lot of people on there, but I think for the most part, we're kind of getting close. I know people behind the scenes here are wanting to go home, and, you know, Ed, Nicole, you guys probably have things to do. I have a new son. I'm a father.
Yep.
Congratulations.
So I need to get home to Jack, little baby Jack, and
teach him his swing.
Yeah, hopefully he
Already
becomes a
working on it?
golfer. We're not going to force golf onto him by any means,
Yeah,
but we do have a simulator right behind us if you're curious what that is.
But his pacifier looks like a golf club, just coincidence.
All right, guys, I want to thank you very, very much for tuning in to tonight's live stream. Before we go, just Ed, Nicole, any comments or thoughts before we ride off into the night?
Yes, I will elaborate on one thing that you mentioned, and that is, yes, as a barbecue enthusiast, I always go to my butcher for medical advice. The reason people look to friends or family members is because of the trust.
Yeah.
I get that, I really do. This entire relationship that we have with our clients is all built on trust. We thwart that in any way, we're gone, negative reviews on Google, what have you, so I get that. But don't be afraid to investigate using a financial professional. Yes, there's a fee involved, but then again, that's okay. I was with Charles, our director of investments, and someone made a comment on our fee structure. Not a bad comment, just like, okay, why? And his immediate response was, what kind of car do you drive? And that immediately caught my eye. I was like, oh, where's he going with this? And the client was driving, let's just put it this way, the client was not driving I'm going to go
VW?
back. No, a 1987 Yugo. Thank you. There you go. Number 3 for Nicole. And so he was not driving that. And so, Charles, that's my point. You're willing to pay more for the added convenience and safety features of that vehicle. And yes, that comes with a cost. So what you're paying for us is way more than just the investment management. That's a part of it. We've got a great team here. It's internal. Check out the website. Check out Chris's YouTube channel. But I think the bigger, what you're actually paying for is the experience, the knowledge, especially on the tax planning side. Some of the savings we provide our clients more than covers our fee for the next 20 or 30 years in some cases. So I just want to elaborate on that.
Potentially.
Potentially, yes. Thank you.
Did that for our compliance
Thank you,
officer there.
Hey, Nathan.
Okay, guys, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very, very much for tuning in. Our client, we always appreciate you. If you have questions, reach out to your advisor, reach out to the team here. That's what we're here for. I really, really appreciate you tuning in. If you're not a client and you want to learn more about Oak Harvest, give us a call, go to the website. We have tons of content out there. And I thank you again for tuning in, and we will see you next month.